Kira had always been a quiet observer, someone whose presence could be felt without her ever needing to speak loudly or demand attention. From the outside, she seemed composed, calm, and perhaps even untouchable, the kind of person people instinctively leaned on when things got difficult. Friends and family alike trusted her with their burdens, believing that her patience and kindness could withstand anything. They did not realize, and perhaps Kira herself had avoided thinking about it for years, that her strength had limits, invisible lines drawn in her heart that were slowly beginning to blur under the constant weight of others' expectations. From a young age, Kira had learned that life was easier if she avoided making waves, if she smiled even when she felt uncertain, and if she listened more than she spoke. She had internalized the idea that being kind and dependable made her valuable, that her worth was tied to how much she could support others. She became the person everyone could rely on, the anchor in their storms, the shoulder to cry on, the voice of reason when tempers flared or worries grew too heavy. In a way, Kira found comfort in her role. Helping others gave her purpose, and she had always been proud to know that her presence made a difference. But as the years went by, something subtle began to emerge within her. The satisfaction she once felt in giving began to fade, replaced by exhaustion that settled deep in her chest. It wasn't that she wanted to stop helping people, she just realized that she had spent so much time caring for others that she rarely took the time to care for herself. She noticed it in small ways at first, the way her shoulders tensed before she even said yes to a request, the way her voice faltered slightly when she had to lie to herself about being okay, the way she would lie awake at night replaying the day's interactions, wondering if she had done enough or if she had somehow failed in someone's eyes. Those nights became longer and heavier as the years went by. She would sit by her window, staring out at the quiet streets and the faint glow of distant lights, and feel a loneliness that was entirely different from being physically alone. It was a sense of invisibility, the quiet ache that comes from realizing that your own needs have been ignored for so long that you almost forget they exist. In the daytime, Kira continued her routines, keeping everything in order, maintaining the smiles, and carrying the responsibilities that people had entrusted to her. She never complained, not because she didn't want to, but because she had been taught that her role was to be strong, to be reliable, to endure silently. But the truth had begun to creep in, being strong for everyone else did not make her invincible. The weight she carried had begun to shape the way she saw herself. She noticed how rarely anyone asked her how she was, how quickly people assumed she could handle whatever was thrown at her, how often she agreed to do things even when her heart felt heavy. And for the first time, she felt the quiet sting of resentment, not toward anyone else, but toward herself for having allowed this pattern to continue unchecked for so long. One evening, feeling the unusual pull of introspection, Kira decided to take a walk. The park nearby was quiet, empty except for a few late joggers and the distant laughter of children playing in a fading sunlight. The air was cool, carrying the smell of grass and early evening blooms. She walked without direction, letting the rhythm of her footsteps guide her, and eventually found herself on a wooden bench beneath a large, old oak tree. The quiet around her felt almost sacred, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to simply breathe. She let her thoughts roam freely without the usual interruptions of responsibility or obligation. And then, without warning, she asked herself the question she had avoided for years: what about me? The words felt heavy in her mind because they were so unfamiliar, but they also felt powerful. She realized that she had spent decades standing for everyone else, listening to their worries, supporting their dreams, carrying their burdens, and in the process, she had never stood for herself. She had never asked what she needed, never spoken her own truths, never admitted her own fears. And the realization hit her with a mixture of relief and fear. It was okay to acknowledge that she was tired, that she needed care, that she deserved to be a priority in her own life. Sitting there, watching the sky shift from amber to soft blue as the first stars appeared, Kira began to understand something she had never allowed herself to believe: strength did not mean carrying everything. Strength could mean putting things down. Strength could mean choosing herself. And with that realization came a quiet sense of empowerment, one that was subtle but undeniable. She knew that change would not come overnight. Learning to walk alone, to stand for herself, to honor her own needs in a world that expected her to give endlessly, would require courage she had never needed before. She would face moments of guilt, moments of doubt, and moments when people might be disappointed that she was no longer always available. But she also knew that continuing the same path would slowly drain the very essence of who she was. For the next several days, Kira began experimenting with small changes. She allowed herself brief pauses before responding to requests for help. She took moments of solitude to sit quietly, to journal, to reflect on her thoughts and feelings without judgment. She began noticing the subtle ways her body and mind communicated exhaustion, learning to respect those signals instead of ignoring them. Each small act of self-awareness became a building block for something greater, the recognition that her own life mattered as much as anyone else's. And with that recognition came a growing sense of clarity. She realized that caring for herself did not make her selfish, it made her stronger, more balanced, more capable of giving when she truly wanted to give rather than out of obligation. She began to see that standing alone, if necessary, was not a sign of weakness but a demonstration of self-respect. She understood that boundaries were not walls meant to shut others out but fences designed to protect the garden within her heart. It was a slow process, and it required patience, humility, and a willingness to feel uncomfortable. Each day, she learned to say no when it was necessary, to prioritize rest, to speak her own truths, and to acknowledge that her emotions were valid and deserving of attention. Some days were easier than others. Some days, the old habits of people-pleasing and silent endurance would resurface, and Kira would have to remind herself gently that change was a process, not an instant transformation. But with every small victory, her confidence grew. And even in the quiet moments when she walked alone through the streets, sat in the park, or rested in her room watching the night sky, she felt a growing awareness of the strength that had always been within her, waiting to be claimed. That strength was not loud or dramatic, it did not need recognition from anyone else. It was a quiet, enduring power, the kind that allowed her to face her own truths without fear, to honor herself without guilt, and to stand firmly in her own life even when no one else understood or supported her. And in those quiet, solitary moments, Kira began to feel a sense of liberation that she had never experienced before. Standing alone no longer felt like isolation. It felt like freedom. Freedom to choose her own path, freedom to protect her peace, freedom to grow into the person she had always been meant to become. As the days turned into weeks, Kira continued to practice these small acts of self-respect and courage. She learned to embrace solitude as a place of reflection and empowerment rather than emptiness. She discovered that her own voice was just as important as the voices of those she had always supported. And slowly but surely, she began to feel the quiet transformation of a life in which she was no longer merely a support system for others but a guardian of her own well-being. By the time the first hints of spring appeared in the trees and flowers around her neighborhood, Kira had reached a subtle but profound understanding: walking alone was not a punishment or a sign of weakness. It was a deliberate, courageous choice to honor herself and reclaim the life she had too long put on hold. And as she sat one evening watching the sunset, feeling the soft warmth on her skin and the gentle breeze in her hair, she whispered to herself with a quiet smile, "I am enough. I can stand on my own. I will stand for myself, no matter what." That night, Kira slept with a lighter heart than she had felt in years, knowing that the journey ahead would not be easy, but that it would be hers entirely, and that sometimes, the greatest strength in the world comes from learning how to walk alone. After months of quiet reflection and small acts of self-care, Kira began to notice subtle but powerful changes in her life. The weight that had once pressed so heavily on her chest seemed to lift slightly each day, like clouds slowly parting to reveal the sky above. She no longer reacted immediately to every request or need that came her way. Instead, she paused, breathed, and considered whether fulfilling the demand would honor her well-being or simply reinforce old patterns of self-neglect. At first, this pause felt uncomfortable. Guilt crept in, whispering that she was being selfish, that she was disappointing those who had come to depend on her. Yet, with each pause, she discovered a surprising truth: setting boundaries did not break the bonds she had with others, it strengthened them. People began to respect her more, not less, because they saw that she was taking care of herself and modeling the kind of strength that comes from self-awareness. Kira started small. She declined invitations to events she didn't feel up to attending. She said no to tasks that drained her without reason. She allowed herself to spend hours in quiet solitude, reading, writing, or simply sitting with her thoughts. These simple actions, which might have seemed minor to an outside observer, were monumental for her. For the first time, she was choosing herself, and the choice felt powerful, even revolutionary. She realized that for years she had defined her value through the lens of others' expectations, but now she was learning to define her worth by her own standards. The journey was not linear. Some days, old habits returned with surprising force. She would find herself saying yes automatically, rushing to help even when it meant sacrificing her energy or peace. She would hear the familiar voice in her mind reminding her that people would be upset if she refused. But each time, Kira reminded herself that the voice of obligation was not stronger than her own desire for self-respect. With patience, persistence, and practice, she began to respond differently. She spoke clearly, calmly, and honestly about what she could and could not give. She found that most people did not react with anger or disappointment. Some even admitted that they had never realized how much she had carried for them all these years. This acknowledgement did not make her feel prideful or superior, it simply made her feel seen. Beyond boundaries, Kira discovered the importance of cultivating joy in her life. For so long, she had defined happiness by the comfort of others or the smooth functioning of her responsibilities. Now, she allowed herself moments of delight without justification. She walked in the park without thinking about tasks she needed to finish. She danced in her room to songs that made her feel alive. She read novels that transported her into worlds she had ignored for years. She drank tea slowly in the mornings, feeling warmth spread through her hands and chest, and she allowed herself to smile simply because she wanted to, not because she felt obligated to. Slowly, these acts of self-kindness became habits. Kira realized that independence did not mean isolation. It meant being present for herself first, so she could engage with the world from a place of completeness rather than depletion. She began to understand that standing alone was not synonymous with being lonely, it was a declaration that her life mattered just as much as anyone else's. As weeks turned into months, Kira's confidence grew. She no longer felt the constant pull to fix everyone else's problems, nor the suffocating responsibility of being the emotional anchor in every situation. She discovered that strength came not from enduring endlessly, but from discerning when to act and when to rest. Her relationships shifted as well. Those who truly valued her began to appreciate the person she was becoming, someone with boundaries, someone capable of both giving and receiving. Some people drifted away, not out of malice but because they could not adjust to the new balance Kira maintained. This loss did not sting as it might have in the past, instead, it served as a reminder that life naturally weeds out those who drain rather than nurture. Kira also noticed something profound within herself. The fears that had held her back began to shrink. Fear of disappointing others, fear of being alone. She faced them intentionally, often through quiet reflection or journaling, sometimes through conversations with a trusted friend who understood her journey. Each confrontation with fear reinforced the belief that she could trust herself, that her own judgment and intuition were sufficient guides in navigating life's challenges. One afternoon, Kira found herself walking along the same path in the park where her awakening had begun. The sunlight filtered through the trees in warm, dappled patterns, and the air smelled faintly of blooming flowers. She stopped beneath the old oak tree, closed her eyes, and inhaled deeply. A sense of peace settled within her, deeper than anything she had felt before. She realized she was no longer merely surviving, she was thriving in a quiet, authentic way. Thriving because she had chosen herself, chosen her own path, and claimed the life that had long been overshadowed by the needs and expectations of others. That moment marked a turning point in her understanding of power and freedom. Kira began taking on projects and pursuits that aligned with her passions, not those dictated by obligation. She explored creative outlets she had neglected, learned new skills, and set personal goals that excited rather than exhausted her. In doing so, she discovered that true fulfillment was not in approval or recognition from others, but in honoring her own desires and abilities. Her mornings became sacred rituals of reflection and intention. She would wake early, stretch gently, and sit in quiet meditation, thinking about what she truly wanted from the day ahead. No longer weighed down by constant worry for everyone else, she could dedicate her energy to meaningful work and genuine connections, rather than endless caretaking. Even in her professional life, Kira noticed a difference. She spoke with confidence, voiced her opinions without hesitation, and allowed herself to take credit for her achievements. She found joy in mentoring others, not because it fulfilled an unspoken obligation, but because she genuinely wanted to share her knowledge from a place of strength and balance. The shift in her mindset extended to her personal relationships. She became more discerning in choosing whom to spend her time with, prioritizing connections that were reciprocal, kind, and supportive. Toxic or draining relationships naturally faded, and Kira no longer felt guilt over the absence of those people in her life. The emotional freedom was intoxicating, and with it came a deeper sense of clarity about who she was and who she wanted to become. Perhaps most importantly, Kira learned the art of resilience. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, conflicts, and uncertainties, but she now faced them with grounded confidence rather than exhaustion. She had cultivated a quiet inner strength, the kind that allowed her to stand firmly in her truth without feeling the need to explain herself to anyone. She began to appreciate the beauty in solitude, the power in being alone without being lonely. There was a newfound joy in waking up knowing that her day was hers to shape, that she could respond to the world without being consumed by it. Kira also reflected on her journey with compassion. She forgave herself for the years she had ignored her own needs, recognizing that she had done the best she could with the understanding she had at the time. The self-compassion she practiced allowed her to approach life with gentleness and patience, both toward herself and toward others. In time, she noticed that her personal growth had a ripple effect. Her kindness and empathy became more authentic, more intentional, and more grounded. People gravitated toward her, not because she carried their burdens, but because she embodied a model of balanced strength that was inspiring without being imposing. Kira's life had transformed from one of quiet endurance to one of active, empowered living. She had learned that standing alone was not about proving herself to the world, but about proving to herself that she was capable of defining her life on her own terms. Her evenings continued to be moments of reflection, but now they were peaceful and restorative rather than heavy with fatigue. She would sit by her window, watching the stars, and feel a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. The road had not been easy, and there were still moments of doubt or struggle, but Kira had built a foundation strong enough to carry her through. She knew that her independence was not a destination, but a practice, a daily choice to honor herself and her well-being. She embraced that practice wholeheartedly, understanding that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. In those moments, Kira recognized the extraordinary strength she had cultivated, a strength born from quiet resilience, thoughtful reflection, and the willingness to confront her own truth. She realized that her life no longer depended on the validation or expectations of others, it depended on her commitment to herself. And that commitment became the compass guiding every choice she made. As Kira moved forward, she continued to walk her path with intentionality and grace. She accepted opportunities that aligned with her values, nurtured relationships that brought mutual respect and joy, and faced challenges with courage rooted in self-trust. She knew that walking alone at times was inevitable, but no longer did it feel like a burden. Instead, it felt like freedom, freedom to shape her own life, freedom to honor her own needs, freedom to grow into the person she had always been capable of becoming. By the time another year had passed, Kira looked back on the person she had been, the quiet, exhausted, invisible helper, and felt a profound sense of pride. She had transformed not through sudden miracles, but through small, consistent acts of courage, honesty, and self-care. She had learned that true empowerment comes from within, that standing alone is sometimes the bravest and most liberating choice, and that self-respect is the foundation on which a fulfilled life is built. Sitting once more beneath the oak tree in the park, watching sunlight filter through the leaves, Kira smiled softly. She whispered to herself with certainty and conviction, "I am enough. I am strong. I am free." And in that simple affirmation, she felt the culmination of her journey, an understanding that the courage to walk alone had opened the door to a life she had always dreamed of, a life defined not by the expectations of others, but by her own strength, her own choices, and her unwavering commitment to herself.